Evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. It is 7 p.m. and I call the September 9th, 2024 School Board meeting to order. The Holmen Board of Education and the School District of Holmen acknowledge that our schools are located on the ancestral homelands of the Ho-Chunk, Sauk and Fox, and Dakota peoples. We celebrate and honor these lands and their sacred significance to Indigenous peoples. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, Board Clerk Maggie Smith, would you please call the roll?
Khadijah Islam.
Here.
Chris Lau.
Here.
Lindsay Need.
Here.
Maggie Smith here. Bridget Todd Robbins.
Here.
Barb Wench.
Here.
Kevin Zilke.
Here.
Jennifer Deek.
Here. With 7 of the 7 board members present, I declare a quorum. I note that the agenda has been posted, distributed, and sent to the local media. With this in mind, are there any changes to this agenda? I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as published.
So moved.
Maggie has moved.
I'll second.
Chris has second to approve the agenda as published. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion to approve the agenda as published, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The motion to approve the published agenda has passed. And we do not have public participation this evening. So we are moving on to reports and discussion. Item 7.1. Executive Director of Finance and Operations, Julie Holmen, will present the 2024-25 proposed budget. This item will appear on the 9:23 consent agenda.
Good evening. This evening, I'll be presenting the 24-25 proposed budget. Previously, the preliminary budget was presented in June, and the original budget will be presented at the end of October during the budget hearing and annual meeting timeframe, and that is the budget that becomes our operating budget for 24-25. So there are still variables in this budget. I'm going to start with some highlights from the issue paper and then go into the budget summary format that you are familiar with, the DPI format. The state aid and local levy revenue in the general fund, calculated using the revenue limit formula, is based on a 5-year trend enrollment projection using grade progression ratios from the last 5 years and then estimated counts for 4K in kindergarten to project what the enrollment might look like for this school year that has started. The actual student membership and revised enrollment projections will be updated after the September count on Third Friday, which is 2 weeks away. The board approved wages and benefit changes, premiums for health and dental insurance, as well as the base wages that were approved this summer are included in the proposed budget estimates. As you are aware, the ending fund balance June 30th becomes our new beginning fund balance for July 1 for this year. In the budget summary, you will see the unaudited 23-24. We are getting closer to audited. I don't expect that it'll change much between now and when that audit is completed. But just so you know, at this time, it is still considered unaudited data for last fiscal year. The unaudited, just to talk about that a little bit more, since it is the beginning fund balance for July 1 of 2024, is looking to come in at $18.3 million, or just over 32%, which is higher than we anticipated. Talked a little bit about that in the issue paper. We offset quite a bit of existing expenses at year end with remaining ESSER dollars, so that federal pandemic money is now spent out fully. It was over $4 million over 3 years, and so that really helped to offset existing expenses and ongoing expenses, as well as like substitute expenses at the end of the year, relieving fund balance. And then the other piece that really helped with that fund balance preservation was increase in interest earnings, which we've talked about before. Last year was quite helpful in the interest earnings piece of the general fund balance preservation. The operating funds in the school district budget are Funds 10, General Fund, and Fund 27, Special Education. So those are considered operating fund. We talk about them together because we have to offset any deficit in special education with the general fund interfund transfer every year. So the combined is considered operational funds. The two key revenue components, general state aid and property tax levy, still have outstanding variables of the third Friday enrollment count, the October 1st Department of Revenue equalized property valuation, and the October 15th Department of Public Instruction state aid certification. So the state aid and the levy in the general fund are still estimates until we have those pieces solidified in October. The assumptions included for the general and special education fund include $325 increase per pupil on the revenue limit formula. So that's the second of the biennium decision last year. So 2 years in a row, and for the next 400, if that's still in statute. So $325 on the revenue limit per pupil. The categorical aid per pupil did not increase over last year. It's been $742 per pupil for the last many years. We did have a board-approved increase of the 4.12% on wages, and then that automatically means an increase to our Social Security and Medicare tax, FICA, based on wage, and then also the WRS Wisconsin retirement system is also a percentage of wage, currently 6.9% of that wage. Health insurance premium increases went up 1.75%, and dental group premium up 6%. The estimated revenue budget for the general fund is $55.2 million. The estimated expenditure budget is $57.6 million. This does propose a deficit spending again for 24-25, and I'll go through and talk about what that looks like and the fund balance estimates for a year from now. The special education fund has an estimated increase of about $94,000 from $10.9 million to $11,059,000. And the interfund transfer from the general fund is estimated at $7,175,000. More information can be found in the budget summary and the budget publication. And again, the original budget will be presented on October 28th, and that will become the operating budget for the year. So this is the budget and DPI summary format that you are familiar with. The first 7 lines start with the general fund balance by designation. And line 8 is the estimated total ending fund balance on June 30th for each of the years presented. Audited 22-23, the unaudited 23-24, and this new proposed budget. The total ending estimated fund balance is $15,894,000. This represents about 27.6% as a percentage of the general fund expenditures. As a reminder, there are 2 lines, restricted and committed, and therefore the assigned and unassigned is an estimate of about 25% at $14.4 million. The revenue sources begin with local sources. The taxes are on line 11, estimated at $12,392,000. That does include the general fund tax levy estimate plus mobile home taxes. And then we also have the new $650,000 recurring operational referendum that was approved in 2022, starting this fall. If you recall, the $450,000 IT override expired. It was a 5-year operational referendum, and we've replaced that with the $650,000. That will be distributed, continue to be distributed $450,000 for technology, and then the balance is to establish those sinking funds for the middle school Evergreen and Viking. The state revenue limit and equalization aid formulas determine the distribution between state aid and levy, and so we need to wait for those variables in October to really solidify the state aid and the general fund levy. And then other revenue includes student activity income, interest, and fees, donations, fines, things like that. You'll notice on line 16, the other revenue is projected to decrease. There's some things that are going away, including our annual wellness grant. That was $30,000 last year. And then there's other things we just don't know that we're going to get, like gifts and donations. We don't always know when we're going to get them, so we do conservatively predict the revenue in the general fund for other. The total estimate for local sources is $13,017,000. Next up is the revenue from other school districts in the state of Wisconsin. This is our open enrollment in revenue, estimated at just over $2 million for 24-25. The open enrollment transfer for regular education is estimated by the state currently at $8,962 per pupil. That's up $344 from last year. And for special education tuition, $13,814 per pupil, and that is also up $344 over last year. The total estimated school district from Wisconsin revenue, again, is $2,042,000. Next is the state sources of revenue. Line 33 is the general state aid. That's the one that is estimated at this time at $36,061,000. That'll depend on the October 15th certification from the state, and then be the balance under the revenue limit goes to the general fund levy. Again, there is an additional $325 per pupil on here. There is also a rather large enrollment decline exemption of over $500,000. So the state allows, the state language allows 100% decline exemption for 1 year, and that is based on an approximate decline in our 3-year average membership of 50. So please keep in mind, we are estimating about a 50 decline in the 3-year average student membership. So in order to soften the blow in your revenue, there's a 1-year exemption on your revenue limit formula to help with that decline. Again, that's about $500,000 this year. The total state sources for revenue estimated in the general fund for 24-25 is $39,679,000. Just want to talk a little bit more about the membership, student membership. We do estimate that to be around 3,994, and that's 50 less than the prior year 3-year average, which was 4,044. The actual head count, remember membership is different than head count. We've talked about this before. The actual head count estimate is about 3,810. That means, our students going elsewhere are subtracted for the head count because they're not in our seats. We think around students in seats in Holmen, and then non-residents that are open enrolling in. So those are the students in seats counted on that third Friday. We estimate that to be about 3,810, down from 3,870 in 23-24. So we are currently trending a little bit more downward than maybe we thought we might for this fall. Keep watching it every Monday. We get a new report. It hasn't changed too much since this report was drafted, unless it's changing like in the higher levels. So we'll find out on third Friday or a little bit after on where those numbers shake out. So let's see, the other revenue in this area is that per pupil categorical aid, that's $724 per pupil. That is calculation times that 3-year average membership, and that's estimated at $2,963,000. And then also in that line 38 is the computer aid and miscellaneous grants. So that's why that number is a little bit more at $3,043,000. Again, the total estimated state sources of revenue, $679,000. Next, we have federal sources. You have heard about the federal cliff for a while now. You can see it here pretty clearly. The last 2 years, we've had over $2 million in federal supported revenue in the general fund, and the estimate for this year is $390,000. So really kind of returning to our old numbers as far as support from federal awards. with all of that pandemic funding expiring. So the total estimate again is $390,000 for federal sources. Last year it was $2.6 million. This is combined other sources of revenue. The subtotal financing sources on line 52. That $151,000 2 years ago was that sale of Oak Grove Elementary School. Last year, that $40,800, that was actually an insurance claim for lightning damage. So it's kind of an unusual thing that you can't predict and put money. We don't know that we're going to get something like that. And so the budget for this year in that line item is zero. And hopefully we don't have any storms that we need to claim funds for. So, and then the subtotal of other revenues at the bottom, around $93,000. This is kind of returning to a more normal level. Last year, we had a lot of E-rate funding. That's federal support. It's called schools and libraries, but it's a lot of technology connectivity reimbursement. And you can get, if you do certain projects, you can get money back from the federal government through what's called E-rate. And we did a big project last year, and much of it was E-rateable, if that's a word. And so you can see we got $320,000 last year based on, you have to spend it to get it, and then there's a percentage reimbursement on those dollars to help support your projects. So returning to around $50,000 there for a total other revenue of $93,000 estimated. Total revenues in the general fund are estimated at $55,222,000. Next, we move on to expenditures, beginning with instructional expenditures are estimated at $25.2 million for 24-25. Again, these include position changes, wages, benefit increases, and also instruction is not just educators in the classroom, it's also the educational assistance support, any related services to those programs that aren't within support services, and then co-curriculars as well. It does include career and technical education or vocational education, physical curriculum, and then pre-K-12 instruction costs. Next up is the subtotal for support services. This includes pupil services, instructional services, general administration, school building level administration, and their support within their offices. A reminder, line 71 is business administration, which is not strictly business services. It also includes all of transportation and facility services within the general fund. And you'll notice there that we do have an increase from 7.8 million unaudited to just over 8 million. And that does include a Prairie View HVAC project that's now carrying into the third year, which was over $200,000, and that's coming out of their sinking fund. And then also a one-time increase for facilities of $90,000, and that was for the high school parking lot repair, seal, replace, paint project that occurred in August. There is not really a lot of money right within Chad's facilities budget to do big projects that are that much money. And so sometimes we do one time and then return back to the operating budget for facilities. So that does include a $90,000 project cost for that parking lot repair seal project. The total for support services is estimated at $19,877,000. Next up is the non-program transactions. This does include the interfund transfer to special education on line 77 of $7.1 million. Instructional service payments, these are our payments for open enrollment out tuition to Wisconsin public school districts, as well as the private school vouchers and the private school special needs scholarship program. So I shared earlier the open enrollment transfer of $8,962 for regular education and $13,814 for special education. The private voucher grades for a 1.0 student, K through 8, the voucher is $10,237, and for grades 9 through 12 is $12,731, and for private special needs scholarship program is $15,409. The total non-program transactions are estimated at $12,481,000. That concludes the general fund expenditures, estimated proposed budget of $57,629,000. This is just a summary of revenue minus expenses and the fund balance, which is the screen I started with, at an estimated almost 15.9 million for next June 30th. This is the dashboard fund balance as a percentage of total of expenditures, and it is lagging data. Just so you can see our trend, the estimate for June 30th of '24, a couple months ago, finished fiscal year, is just around 32, so more or less staying steady for Holmen, and then estimated to drop closer to or below that peer average that's shown on this chart. And then this will be updated with, again, lagging data for the annual meeting and for the annual report. Any questions on the general fund?
Actually, just going back to that graph, so the state average, the fund balance overall, is that high? So is that because of ESSER funding probably those years, or why do you think all these districts have a high
That
fund
much?
balance?
Well, you can see the state trend was higher, really. And I would say prior to March of 2020, they were starting to trend that way. I don't know for sure the answer to that. I wouldn't be surprised if several of them at least maintained when we get the data for 23, 24, if they maintain more because they offset existing costs with pandemic money and then potentially start on the decline. Obviously, we were a little bit higher than that, and the peers increased during that time. I don't know that it's due to pandemic federal funding specifically, because it appears to me that they started going up
Kind of interesting
before
that
we
our
got
peer
that
districts are
money.
low, and then the state average, though, I mean, all the other school districts are much higher. Okay.
Maybe that, I don't think it directly ties to my question, but I was curious. I've read like the Milwaukee Public Schools situation could be significant enough to affect other districts. Has there been any update? I know it's like ongoing, but is that still possible?
My resources say don't get too wrapped up in the reporting on that quite yet, because I know that they're being audited by a few different agencies right now. And the impact would not be this year. If there's an impact, it would probably be the following year. So, and there's different things going on there, like late reporting of financial statements. It was, I think, one of the triggers. So when everyone else had their deadline, Milwaukee Public Schools hadn't reported all their audited financial statements. And then the other thing is, if you recall, when we spend, the state, we have a shared cost component of equalized aid. And so that if we spend a lot in 23, 24 in general fund and capital projects within general fund and in debt service, the state has a component of sharing that in the following year. So that's one of the reasons that we are seeing our aid increase, or my estimate of our aid increasing. It's not just the $325 per pupil that's coming on the revenue limit. It's also the fact that we paid down some significant debt last year that's going into the shared cost. So the state shares in that expense, but it doesn't happen until the following year afterwards. So in regards to Milwaukee Public Schools, if they're spending a lot of money now, 24, 25, the impact that may ripple across the state for the other districts is probably going to be 25, 26, right? So if they have a lot of capital costs this year, or debt costs this year, because they are so big,
Sure.
and there's only so much in the pot, it could ripple. So like my WASBO resources say, don't go right to the legislative white paper and say Holmen's gonna go down this amount of money because of it, or up, or whatever's gonna happen. It needs to kind of play out, for us to really see how that'll impact us, and I don't think it will until 25, 26. We'll keep our eye on that. So there's a few different components there, so.
Thank you.
I have another ESSER funding question. So at line 42, that's where I'm assuming that's where the ESSER funding
Which, sorry,
sits?
federal?
Beyond special grants and programs.
Is that right? Or no?
Yep.
Okay, so is the 91,000 that's proposed for 25, is that still just remaining ESSER funding that
No,
needs to
we
be
are out of
presented?
ESSER funding. It's just another federal grant that's required to be coded to that source.
Because we had until like September to spend it though, right?
We did. Yeah, and we try to spend it out within our fiscal year and not drag it out over the summer.
Okay.
So
we
that
had
we can get it
spent.
all claimed and wrapped up with the audit, yeah. So we did. We claimed it all as of June 30th.
Okay. And
There
is that
is,
number consistent with how, like what it was like before ESSER funding? That 91,000, is that used to see?
Jennifer, I'd have to look exactly which grant that is. I do know, if you look at the next line item, which is Title I,
Okay.
we had similar Title I funds 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Do you remember? 3. And then they do like a community, it's not just like our free and reduced in our schools, but a community income per household. Don't quote me, I don't remember the exact name of it. But our Title I grant funding was cut in half. I don't know if you remember this or if you were here. But you can see it was 132 back in 22, 23, and maybe in the year prior to that. I'd have to look at more columns. But that went up last year, kind of returning to a more normal level. And I'm just forgetting exactly which grant is right above that, because they combine things sometimes into those same source codes. The other thing I was going to say is part of the ESSER funding was also used out of special education funding, and so the revenue matched that in special education. So this isn't fully ESSER in general fund, because part of it was, we had special education teachers also coded to some of that funding in Fund 27, so. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the general fund? Otherwise, we'll continue with special projects. So Fund 21 is our grants, gifts, donations, and scholarships fund. This is the one that we wait till the fiscal year's over, I reconcile it all, and then their starting balances for July 1 for their budgets are any carryover that they may have had. So this is a unique fund in the fact that they get to carry over any balance. We do have over 150 sub-accounts within the special projects fund. And then we also have a scholarship designation within that same fund. The estimated budget for expenditures for 24-25 is $1,026,000. And then there obviously is a little bit left in reserve with an ending fund balance of 1.2 million, and that's primarily scholarship reserve. So the difference there, the 200,000 is scholarship reserve. Any questions on how that works? The special education revenue and expenditure budgets are both $11,059,000 because they cannot be in a deficit position. Line 95 shows that interfund transfer that I discussed in the general fund expenditure lines. And the, I forgot what else I was gonna say, I'm sorry. Again, this includes all of the expenses for special education, including the same wage and benefit increases for the teachers that teach within special education, those educators and service providers within that fund. It is an increase over last year as far as the interfund transfer. The actual increase in the budget is not as much as the increase in the transfer. We don't have the federal funds, again, helping to support or supplant some of these costs for 24-25. And there's the matching expenditures for special education with $8 million in instruction, $1.8 million in support sources, and then non-program transactions on line 161. That includes not only substitutes through Teachers on Call for special education educators or educational assistants, but it also includes any estimates for tuition costs for students that are placed outside of our district for services. Next up is the debt service fund. The proposed revenue in debt service is $9,655,000. That is proposed at this time, and it will be revised when we get a bond for the remainder of the 2022 capital referendum. And so that may change at that time. The proposed expenditures based on principal and interest due on the bonds is $7,600,000. You see in the bottom right corner, the estimated indebtedness. That includes that $24.75 million that we have yet to bond out of the $74.75 million. We need to do that. We're planning on that in January to meet our cash flow needs for the construction. And so that is included in there. It's in italics. It has to happen, I imagine, by June 30th of 2025. That is going to be the total indebtedness on the books for what we owe for the total bonds. The Prairie View debt is paid off, so that was one that you've seen in the past few years. We paid that off in 23-24. So we remain with the high school debt from the addition and remodel, and then this new capital debt for the 2022 referendum. Next is the Capital Projects Fund. This includes both Fund 42 and Fund 46. Fund 42 is the construction fund. It's where we record all the expenditures while we're doing the construction and the revenue to pay for the construction as well as any interest earnings. Fund 46 is a long-term capital improvement trust fund. At this time, I'm not recommending a transfer to Fund 46 from Fund 10, knowing our deficit spending in Fund 10 and our direction to help identify new revenue resources next year to help with that. So right now, the Fund 46 estimated revenue would just be interest earnings, with that balance estimated at $775,000 next year. So the rest of that $16.3 million would be remaining construction dollars to finish out those projects in 25-26, hopefully by the end of next calendar year. That's the plan. So the revenue estimated at $25.6 million, and the expenditures entirely for the construction projects estimated at almost $42.8 million in this fiscal year, give or take how the draw schedule occurs and the completion of the projects at that time. So there will be some remaining as we move into next summer and completing those projects for the construction. The Fund 46 Long-Term Capital Improvement Trust Fund, if you recall, had a caveat on it. We could not spend it for 5 years. We did open that in 2021, and so I can't even build expenditures into the budget quite yet, but we could if we wanted to talk about that going forward. So. Next up is the Food Service Fund in Fund 50. Estimated revenue is $3,733,000, and the estimated expenditures are just under that at $3,706,000, with approximate increase to fund balance of $27,687. This expenditure budget does include $300,000 to help support the Evergreen Kitchen addition and remodel in regards to equipment for the kitchen. Next is the Community Service Fund in Fund 80. The estimated revenue and expense for this budget is $200,000. Looking for your support. The Boys and Girls Club, we met with them more recently, and they are adding or have added additional supports for mental health awareness, staff support and training, behavior management, community engagement, collaboration, data collection, tracking and analysis, and shared resources. And so part of their mental health focus for the community of Holmen is to support this. And so we are asking for 200 instead of 100,000. The original 100,000 that has been in this budget for the last many years was specific to that Sail to Success after school programming and educational director. And so this is a separate program and director position for mental health supports for our Holmen School District residents and families at the BGC here in Holmen. Any questions on that?
So the Fund 80, if I go back 2 years, the 22-23, the revenue brought in for that was 200,000. Was that just still for the regular sale?
It was, and it was
Yeah.
also in an effort to help support the tax rate as well. And so
Okay.
it was a combined effort at that time. You can see it is in fund balance mostly, because we do carry a fund balance in Fund 80, which is also good because we're expending 6 months before we get any tax revenue. So it helps support the cash flow in Fund 80 until we start getting our cash revenue, because this is entirely levy. So we're paying bills July through December, and our first tax proceeds come in January. So it also helps with the cash flow for that piece, but that's why you're seeing that 2 years ago.
Okay.
Yep. Any other questions?
To go back to the head count and the decline, do we get any data from families that move or open enroll elsewhere that they've done so? Or is it always just sort of a wait for that count in September to see what the difference is?
I would say some of each.
Okay.
Part of the count reconciliation includes a requirement between districts to match like the change. So the child could not be counted in both Holmen and, let's say, Onalaska if they've open enrolled to Onalaska. So they have to reconcile that to the location of enrollment. And we'd have to, in that example, remove that student from our count. So that reconciliation takes place every fall. And then again, I believe in January, because we have a second Friday, January count as well. And then they take the average, and that becomes our membership for the year. So I would say sometimes they tell us and sometimes they don't. We also often get record requests from those districts. If a student has left, we'll be contacted, then we know that they left, right? So I think it just depends. We don't always know, so. And sometimes they walk in the door, tomorrow. Yeah.
There's no outreach to families of why they left or like an exit survey.
No, we've done in the past different studies on why, the students that are like open enrolling other places are going to private schools and their reasonings for that. And in most of the studies, a lot of it was, much of it was around convenience and location in situations, and such as like our 4K programming, or I know Julie had done more of a involved study just this past year. Was this last year?
Yeah, I did a survey,
Yeah,
and I did
and
present
share
it, so
that
it would be in your board materials presentation. And trying to sort of figure out where our assumptions accurate, trying to get information that way. And you can't get everybody to reply to surveys, but in general, a lot of our open enrollment out is to Unalaska. The majority of our open enrollment out is to Unalaska. And oftentimes, whether it's survey response or opinion, oftentimes they never actually entered our schools, but they may now live here. So they just kept their enrollment in the school that their child was in, but may live in Holmen now. So that's not uncommon. We've tried to investigate before sometimes, and principals have never even heard of these students, possibly because they never actually were enrolled here, but they're considered open enrollment out because their residence is now here. So that happens. And convenience, daycare, workplace, things like that were other responses within that survey. So
I just feel like there's a big uptick in homeschooling, and I don't know how much that is affecting any of the numbers at all.
the
It's
challenge
mostly-
with homeschooling reporting is it doesn't happen until October. So we won't, homeschool families don't need to report homeschool until October. So it's after our third Friday count, it's after a lot of other pieces. So I don't know that we can answer whether or not we have an uptick or not in homeschool for this year yet.
We haven't seen
Yeah.
an uptick at this point in time.
Yeah.
I'm aware of.
No.
Yeah.
One more enrollment related question. So I remember when we had the Holmen Online Academy, and then we no longer offer that, and there's just one, right, in the Cooley Region, the virtual Cooley Region Virtual Academy.
I'm gonna defer to Kim because she was more involved in the academy, although I know that Cooley Region Virtual Academy is still in La Crosse, right? Yeah.
So if we, just out of curiosity, if somebody was in the Holmen one when we ended that and they switched to Cooley Region Virtual Academy, are they now considered a student of the School District of La Crosse? Okay. And that was a really small number though, right? I remember we didn't have very many students. Okay.
There are other virtual academies in the state of Wisconsin that we have students enrolled in as well. It does happen. Yep, yes, yep.
And they're all considered a unique school district?
Or like CRBA where it's a charter within another district.
Okay.
Not very many, but
Come through today for grants for. Yeah, that's that order, yeah. So, we see that frequently, but yeah, that's happened for years, so that's not.
Good. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
thank you.
Moving on to the consent agenda. For the consent agenda, the board has been furnished with background materials on each item or has discussed it at a previous meeting. These will be acted upon with one vote without discussion. Would any board member like to pull an item out of the consent agenda to be discussed and or voted on separately? I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as provided.
So moved.
That was Barb. And Lindsay. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the consent agenda, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion passes. Moving on to the board debrief. I will call upon board members and ask you to present any comments or committee reports you have. And tonight, we'll start with Khadijah.
Yeah, I assume I'm not alone in this, that, we're in the middle of an election season, and I'm sure people are trying to avoid all of the campaign commercials and emails and phone calls. And it seemed very prominent to me tonight, listening to the budget, just having a lot of pride in the way that the School District of Holmen utilizes its resources, manages its finances, and makes sure that we're providing the best possible educational opportunities in this district. And I think folks like Julie make that possible. And so I'm always really thankful that she's the one in charge of all of that. It's not me. And I think that there can be times at this board table where I feel frustrated that so many things are outside of our control, especially things like state funding for public education. And without trying to sway people either way, I think it's important that all of those folks who are running for elections right now understand how important they are to that conversation, and that they consider the needs of their school districts in their campaign platforms. So that's a call to all those who are elected that we need your help. We do the best with what we have, and we do a really, really great job, and we're a really great district. And we need partners in this. So, and I think that's regardless of party or partisanship. It's just taking care of the community. So hopefully we can form partnerships with whoever gets elected and continue ongoing partnerships with the folks who hold those offices now. And thank you for those who've been advocates for public school funding in the past. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Chris?
We had a policy meeting, our first one of the year last week. We're moving forward 3 policies, which you will mention here in a bit. But other than that, our next one's next month, and that's all I have.
All right, Lindsay?
Yeah, tonight we had the first DEI committee meeting for the fall, and it was really exciting. I was really happy the way that everything was put together and making it interactive, where everyone's voices were at the table and prioritizing different goals, and then evaluating ways to measure those goals and what that looks like. Just a lot of brainstorming and a lot of individuals at the meeting. It was fun to see community members and faculty and just a variety of individuals at the table. So more to come with that.
Okay, Maggie?
As Chris mentioned, we did have the first policy meeting. We had 4 policies that were discussed, and then we also established, I would say, committee norms, new committee, new year. One of those will be returning back, and then the other 3 moved forward to the full board. Other than that, I just want to say thank you to Julie. I feel like the longer that I'm here, the more the budget just feels like a living, breathing thing with a lot of moving pieces, and appreciate all the details you bring to us and questions you answer.
All right, Bridget?
Yeah, I also want to thank Julie. I think just the way you articulate and explain items in our budget, it has become a little more easier to understand, and I just appreciate all the work that you put into that. As Lindsay had mentioned, we did have our DEI committee meeting. Just for those interested, we really looked at our action items and are giving recommendations to our district leadership, who will come back next month, October 14th, to really give us presentations on what that strategic plan will continue to look like. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Okay, thank you. Barb?
Thanks again to Julie for all the work you're doing, and we'll dive into that a little deeper in 2 weeks at our first Finance Committee meeting.
And Kevin?
Hello. I want to talk about things that's been going on at the high school, talking about to you guys so you guys get informed. And yeah, so the first thing is at the start of the school year, there were study halls, around 100 to 150 people in each study hall, which is a lot of people. But most recently, today and tomorrow, they started implementing smaller study halls. So then that's like 20 to 30 people. Really, like, the start of school year, new schedule, it's a little complicated, so it's great that things are getting resolved. And then with the schedule, there are a lot of mixed feelings. People have said it was good because they feel like time's moving faster. And then people said that it's a little bad because they feel overwhelmed with their extra classes, work, school, and life balance. And some of their needs are like not met as it was before, because now they have different lunches every single day. They have study halls, which people said they weren't going to get as much. And then there's also low downtime for work and life. And then also the new line-wise, people are upset about this from the change from Aristotle. And people who play games still play games. There feels like a lack of trust between the school and the students. and people are uncomfortable with the constant monitoring. There's 10-second screenshots, 24/7 monitoring, and recording all keystrokes. And then, along with the study halls, there's the new releasement policy, which is along the lines of having goodish grades, higher GPA, and non-excused absences to be able to have a release, which I think is needed and is good, but some people don't like this change because they were not informed about it, since it takes effect of your last year, like grades, GPA, and excuses, which if people knew this was coming, then maybe they could have prepared better for it. So that's it. I'm just going to inform you guys what people are thinking, people are saying, and how people are reacting to the new school year.
All right, thank you. I want to congratulate Rachel O'Donnell, who was invited to be the trombone euphorium coach for the 2024 Middle Level State Honors Band. I think that's pretty cool. And I also just want to say I went to the football game on Friday night, and congrats on the Holmen win. They did better than the Packers that evening. So that was a fun time. All right, moving on to item 9.3. The board has been provided with notes from the April 22nd Policy Committee meeting, so please take a look at those. Item 9.4, the board has been provided with 3 policies that the Policy Committee recommends for consideration. If any board member has questions regarding a policy, they should reach out to Dr. Mueller prior to September 23rd meeting, when the policies will appear on the consent agenda for approval. Moving on to item 9.5, our upcoming board meeting schedule. On September 23rd, we have a Finance Committee meeting at 5 p.m., followed by a board meeting at 7 p.m. On October 2nd, we have a Policy Committee meeting at 5 p.m. On October 14th, we have a DEI Committee meeting at 5 p.m., followed by a board meeting at 7 p.m. And then on October 28th, we have the budget hearing at 6 p.m., followed by the annual meeting, and followed by a regular board meeting. So is there any other business that needs to come before the board at this time? If not, I would entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting.
So moved.
Chris has moved.
Second.
Khadijah has second to adjourn the meeting at 7:51 p.m. Motion carried. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion passes.